In this lecture, we will learn about 6 properties to style text with CSS. And let's just quickly recap what we did in the last lecture. So we are writing external CSS in this CSS file, and the CSS file is always composed of multiple CSS rules. So right now we only have one CSS rule, but of course we will now start adding more of them. Now, a CSS rule always starts with a selector. So in this case, we are selecting the H1 element. But if there were more H1 elements, then the selector would actually select all of them. Then we have this declaration block here, into which we can write one or more declarations like this one. And each declaration has this property name, so in this case the color, and then the value that we specify for that property, which in this case is this keyword of blue. Okay, and so now we will start adding some more properties here. And the first one that I want to use is the font size. So here we can basically specify the size of the text. And each property can take different types of values, such as length or keywords. So you see that here in the color, the value is a keyword. But now here in the font size, we actually need a length. So basically the size of the text in this case. Now we can specify length using different units in CSS, but don't worry about that for now. So for now, we will simply use the very simplest one, which is pixels on your screen. So we can specify the font size, for example, to 26 pixels, then add a semicolon here. And so now the text on the screen will be exactly 26 pixels of your physical screen. So if I give this a save now, then you see that the text here decreased. And just remember that in case it didn't update on your computer and you are successfully connected to the live server, as you can see down here, then just manually reload the page here once, and then in the successful updates here of the code, it will then automatically reload your page. But anyway, let's now start adding the next property, which is the font family. And so here you can specify basically different fonts for your text. So just like you can specify a font in something like a Word document or a Google Page document, you can do the same in CSS. However, what's different in the case of CSS is that you cannot simply use a font family that you have installed on your computer, because that wouldn't then work for all the users that are going to visit your page in the future, unless they also have that font installed on the computer, right? So there is a solution for that we will talk about later, but for now we will simply not actually specify a real font family, but instead just use the keyword that we want the browser to use any font size that is a sans serif. And sans serif, we will also learn a little bit later what that actually means, so in the design section of this course. But if we give this now a save, you see that this font here changed completely, right? So now it looks more clean. But what matters is that now as we update our page, in fact, the font family here of this heading now looks very different, right? So it no longer has these serifs, which are like these small things here at the end of the letters. And again, later in the design section, we will then learn how we can specify specific font families for our pages. But now let's take a look at our next property here for text, which is text transform. And so with text transform, we can basically turn a text uppercase. So you can see one more time that VS Code gives us a lot of suggestions here. So this whole list. And so the most used one here is actually uppercase. So uppercase like this, and the result is exactly what you would expect. So all the text simply turned uppercase. So this is a simple one. And now let's try another one, which is called font style. And here again, you see these options, and the most used one in this case is to set some text to italic. So let's check that out. And indeed, that is just what happened. So the text turned italic as expected. Great. So we already covered 4 properties and some of its possible values here. So we're making good progress. And of course, as I mentioned before, you do not have to start memorizing these properties here now. You will get used to them over time as you start using them more and more. And let's actually get rid of this one here, because we will actually talk about colors a little bit later. Okay, so let's now go to our next headings. So let's now style our H2 element. So that is this basically main heading of this article. And so we can use the properties that we already learned. And so if you keep typing these property names, they will start getting into your brain. So this one, let's actually make it even bigger than the H1. So really big, like 40 pixels. And that's no problem at all. So just because the H1 is the main heading of the page, it doesn't mean that it also needs to be the biggest one. So being the H1 is really all about semantics, not only about what it looks like. So we have a nice big text, and now let's just make it also a sans serif. So giving it this modern look and feel. So the sans serif keyword, and here we go. Next up, let's style our paragraphs. And so as I mentioned before, by selecting the P element like this will actually select all the P elements that are on our page. So this paragraph here, and this, and really all the ones that we have here on the page. Okay, so let's give it again a font size, let's say of 22 pixels. And for now, all of these length here, so all of these numbers that I've been using are kind of random. But later we will also learn how we can use a system so that we can basically automatically figure out which font sizes we should use. Okay, now I also want to change the font family again. And once again, using sans serif. And nice. That looks very nice already. And if we compare it with our demo, then we can see that we start getting closer to our demo page. So what we want to achieve in the end. There is actually just one more thing that I want to change here in the paragraphs, which is to specify yet another new property, which is the line height. So I will first actually specify it, and then you will see the difference in the text. So here we actually use a value without a unit. So in this case, this 1.5 simply means that the line height will be 1.5 times the font size. All right, so by default, the line height is simply 1. But now if we set it to 1.5, then you should see the space between the lines here increase. So between here and here and here. So look closely at that as I now click here to reload the page. And you see that really changed. Right, and we could set it even higher, of course, and then we would get even more space, but that looks already a bit too much. So let's go back to 1.5 like this. Now, by the way, something quite interesting happened here that maybe you noticed. So remember how inside of these paragraphs that we just styled, we have different elements such as this italic text, which is an EM element, remember? So here in this paragraph, for example, we have the EM element, or here in this paragraph, we have the strong element, right? Or down here we have the anchor. So this element right here. And as you can see, these elements here on the page, so for example, this anchor here somehow got the same font size and the same font family as the P element, even though we did not specify these styles for the link anywhere. So we didn't specify the font size and the family and the line height, not for the anchor, not for strong text, or not for strong elements, and also not for the EM element, right? But still, they got these styles applied to them somehow, right? And the reason for this is a very important mechanism called inheritance. Now, this is a little bit complex to understand, and so we will have a whole lecture on inheritance a little bit later. But still, I wanted to already show you this effect in action here at this point. But anyway, let's now keep styling or reminding elements. So starting with H3, and let's put that here after the H2 to group our rules here in a logical way. So the font size in this one, let's make it like 30 pixels. So that's going to be this one here, exactly, and this one. So again, we have multiple H3 elements, and so by using the H3 selector here, we will select all of them. And now just the font family again, and setting it to sans serif. All right. And now finally we have the H4 heading. So that's this one here. So let's again set the font size and the font family. So 20 pixels. And here sans serif. And actually, let's also turn the text uppercase here. So, and remember how we use the text transform property for that. We set it to uppercase like this. Nice. And now there is just one final property that I want to show you to basically style text, which is that we can also align text. So again, a little bit like we can do in Microsoft Word or in Google Pages or something like that. And so for that, we use the text align property. And again, you can see the options here. So one interesting one that we can use is to align the text to the center. And so guess what will happen now when I save it? Well, we need to go down here again. And you see that now it is in the center of the page. And technically it is in the center of its parent element, but that parent element basically occupies this entire page. And so therefore it is now at the center of the page. All right. And so now the only thing that we are missing is these list items here. So all of these 5 and these 3, and also these anchors. So the links. But we will style the links a little bit later because there are some special cases for links. So let's just finish this video by styling these li elements. All right. Let's do that down here. And notice how we do not style the OL element and the UL element that are the parent elements of the list items. Okay. So remember that the list itself is an OL or it is a UL, but we do actually style the LI elements. Okay, and so again, let's set the font family to something. So to sans serif, actually. Give it a save. And we also want to change the font size one more time. So by default, we get this font size that we see here, which is usually 16 pixels by default. Okay, so that's an important thing that we also need to know a little bit later. So take note of that. But of course, we want to make it a little bit bigger. So we have our paragraphs at 22 pixels. So let's actually make this a little bit smaller. So let's say at 20 pixels. And that's it. Beautiful. So we finished the basic styling of our text of our page, and we learned about 6 new CSS properties along the way. So take some time to review what we just did, and then let's move on to the next lecture where we will learn a little bit more about selectors.